Welcome, campers. It's basic training boot camp for your cash. All the things you're supposed to know about managing your money, but no one ever taught you. Here's your host, Steve Noviello.
Welcome back, campers. My guest today, Alex Dubé, CEO and founder of Door. I have to say, I have been seeing your billboards around town.
That's good. Our CMO is doing something right.
I was going to say, so you're spending some money here. The nice thing is that you're spending money and you're saving consumers money. So we've got a lot to talk about during this episode today. I do want to just kind of start out real quick with how you folks are doing things differently when it comes to buying and selling real estate.
Sure. So I started Door based on a personal experience, which hit close to home for me. My mom sold her home. This is about 5 years ago now, and she'd owned it for 20 years or so. So built up a lot of home equity, which we'll talk about later.
Sure.
And she paid 6% commission to sell the house, which is pretty common in the U.S.
Yeah.
And for her, that amounted to a little over $50,000, a lot of money. And that just made me look at the space, research it pretty intensively, and realize that the cost people have to pay these days for real estate brokerage services is really out of whack with the value received. And really the reason is the internet. People look online now to find homes, and it has just drastically changed the way that real estate agents work. And yet the fee structure really hasn't changed for 200 years. And so at its core, Door was a tech-enabled real estate brokerage. We charge a flat $5,000 regardless of the price of the home to sell a house. And if you buy a home, we split the commission with you. So all of the commission that we receive representing you as a buyer, we give 50% back to you. And we've saved our clients an average of about $12,000 each.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about real quick, because you mentioned, it's an interesting point. The way that realtors do their job is vastly different. I know for me, so my husband and I actually have been toying with the idea of maybe getting a bigger home. Our family is growing. And the first thing we do, and we have an agent, is I look through the MLS, and then I let my agent know where I would like her to take me. Back in the day, I didn't have that kind of access, and the agent really had, I mean, they're knocking on doors, they're making phone calls, that kind of stuff. So really, at the premise of your idea here, I gotta say, you're kind of right. I mean, not that this woman is not earning her money, but it certainly doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of work she used to have to do.
Well, I hope I can convince you to use Door by the end of this. But
I don't know, she's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. What people tend to do now, 95% of people look online to find a house. And 2016 was the first year in which a majority of buyers said, bought a house that they found on their own. So the normal thing to do now is probably what you're doing, which is you find a house and then you say, hey, I want to look at this house or these houses. And then your agent says, great, let's do that. I think what people don't understand, generally speaking, is when you're buying a home, real estate agents will tell you that their services are free. It's like this magic service, the only one on earth that's free. In actuality, they're getting 3% of the transaction. And so
who pays that money? Because there's always, am I paying 3? Is the seller paying 3? Is the seller paying 6?
Sure. I look at it as the deal is paying the transaction cost. There is generally 6% commission, and that's 3% to the listing agent, 3% to the buyer's agent. It is your money, though, as a buyer. You are the one forking over X $100,000 to buy the home, and so you are not directly cutting your agent a check. And I think if it were set up that way, the fees would have changed a long time ago. But your agent is getting compensated 3% of the purchase price if you're buying a home.
So this idea of I don't actually even acknowledge the amount of money I'm spending because it's just part of, I say, okay, well, I'll pay, let's say, $450,000 for the house. Well, you're actually getting 94% of that in value. The other 6 is his fee that if I had to sit and write a check for, I might go, wow. Well, that's a lot of money for a house that I found on my own. Totally.
Let's say the average home price now is about $340,000 in Dallas. So for easy math, let's say $400,000. So 3% of $400,000 is $12,000. 6% is $24,000. So if you are buying a $400,000 home, $26,000, generally speaking, is going just towards commissions. So exactly like you said, a significant portion of the purchase price is going towards nothing other than paying the agents that are involved in the transaction.
So, but let's look at that for a second. And before we do, I do want to ask this. I know when we go to an open house, the first question the agent always says, "Are you working with somebody?"
Are you working with an agent?
Now, if I say no, does that mean I don't have to pay the other 3%? Because there's really kind of no way out of the fee to begin with.
Yeah, this is where it gets kind of complex, and I think the true cost of the service is really hidden. What generally happens is the listing agent, the listing broker, signs a contract with the seller that says the seller will pay 6% to sell the home. And I think a common misconception is that, oh, if I represent myself, I'm saving money. You're really not, because the seller signs an agreement with the listing broker saying, I'm going to pay 6%, and I authorize you to offer 3% to cooperating agents, so to buyer's agents. So it's a funny system. There are two contracts involved. There's the purchase contract between the buyer and seller. The agents are not party to that contract. And then there's the listing agreement between the seller and the listing broker. And then there's also an agreement between the listing broker and cooperating brokers to split commission, and that's the MLS, the multiple listing service. So there are these two transactions really occurring. Commission is being changing hands, and then the purchase is occurring. And so when you are representing yourself, the 6% pool of commission doesn't change. That is already agreed to by the seller and his or her agent.
And whether or not it shows up as savings, or whether or not they say, okay, well, I'm taking 6 because that's what you gave me.
Right.
You've authorized me to give some away if I want.
Right.
I don't want. I don't want to.
Yeah, they don't have to.
Right. And then we also see a lot, people say, well, I'm going to sell it on my own. For sale by owner, 9 times out of 10, I find that these are folks who are generally trying to save this 6%, which may not be necessary through your service.
I don't think so. I think about 8% of the market sells for sale by owner, which is FSBO, FSBO, as we like to call it. And I think a strange thing is at the turn of the century, around the year 2000, 20% of people sold FSBO, for sale by owner. So that's actually gone down since the advent of the internet, which is counterintuitive, at least to me. I think what you tend to see with for sale by owner homes is that, painting with a broad brush, they tend to be overpriced versus what the market would actually bear. And I think that's because sellers who are non-agents don't have access to the MLS, so they don't have true sales comparable sales information. So it tends to be a little bit harder to price your home. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, I do not think that 6% is a fair transaction fee. But I do think it's valuable to have a professional involved. And so our agents are employees. They're not independent contractors. But selling with door or buying with door, you're saving thousands of dollars. I think it's a much more fair commission structure, fair fee structure than what you see in the traditional old-fashioned brokerage market.
So I know my realtor friends and my realtor fans are right now clawing at their device, saying, but I do so much more. I mean, finding the house is just a small piece.
Sure.
I mean, I'm negotiating, I'm making sure, I know, again, for me, my agent she's there making sure the inspection is there, and she's getting me, her contractors to get me bids on stuff for a house I am buying. And I mean, all of these ancillary services that, quite honestly, I think that she does earn her commission.
Yeah.
But you say still it's too much.
I still think it's too much. Let's say.
So does Door do those things?
We do, absolutely. And there is work involved. There's no doubt there. But I think when you think about it slightly differently, it becomes clear just how crazy the traditional fee structure is. Let's say you're buying a $500,000 home again. You are paying your agent $15,000 for that service. 95% of the time, 3% commissions offered to buyer's agents in DFW. And so think about it this way. If your agent said, okay, we're going to get started on the home search, write me a check for $15,000 and we'll get rolling. And then at the end of it, you get your house. Well, you could go hire a partner at a high-powered law firm. You could go hire a partner at a high-powered accounting firm. You could go hire a interior decorator and likely still come out ahead, likely still not end up paying $15,000 for those services. Because at the end of the day, it takes 10 to 20 hours to do the actual transaction. So you're paying an enormously high hourly wage to that real estate agent. And really what you're paying for is that 90% of the traditional agent's time is spent generating leads. Whereas in our model at Door, 100% of their time is spent on client service. They don't generate their own leads. So that's the big discrepancy, I think. And that's why the fees have remained so fat in the old-fashioned model, is because you have to pay a high fee because the average agent does 4 to 5 deals a year. So it's a really inefficient system.
So, but looking at that though, so the agent, I mean, I know the other benefit that I get from a traditional agent are things like, you know, maybe you've got some hip pocket listings in your brokerage that I might want to know about. Is that something that's going to happen with Door?
It's not, and reality is that doesn't happen. That's a very infrequent occurrence. The only time you see that start to happen more is on the luxury listings, quote unquote, the $1 million+ homes. Park Cities in Dallas is the area I'd point to as having the most hip pocket listings, and hip pocket listings are just listings that are not on the MLS.
Right. Hey, I know that I've got somebody who's would sell if they could find the right buyer, or you know,
really hard to find data on how often that happens. But my hunch is that's only single digits percentages of transactions that occur. To give you an idea, there are 120,000 sales a year in North Texas. So very, 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 very few transactions are actually hip pocket listings. Agents will say that is one of the benefits of working with them. You know, oh, come work with my brokerage because we've got hip pocket listings. Reality is it doesn't happen that often.
The other thing that I love about my agent, especially if I'm selling a home, or about other agents if I'm looking for a home, is I love to go to open houses. I like you to host one to show off my home. I like to, even as a looky-loo in the neighborhood, see what's going on. Is Door going to hold an open house for me?
We don't do open houses, and I think the reason is what you just said, the looky-loos. If you hold an open house, what 80% of the visitors tend to be are people who are in the neighborhood who say, oh, I would love to see what this house looks like. I've always wondered. And they're not really buyers. They're coming to the house to just look around. The dirty secret of open houses, and if you get an agent behind closed doors, they'll usually tell you this, open houses are really bait to find buyers. That's why agents host open houses, because they're hoping that an unrepresented buyer comes in. And you mentioned earlier, that's why the first words out of an agent's mouth when you walk into an open house are you working with an agent? It's because they're trying to get you as a buyer client. And so,
and the second question is, could you sign in and let me know how to contact you?
Exactly, because they want your contact information. They're not looking to sell the house. I mentioned earlier, 95% of people look online to find a house, and 20 or 30% will actually walk into an open house. So if you drew a Venn diagram, they would entirely overlap.
Right.
People find out about open houses more often than not looking online, in fact.
But one might say all it takes is one. I mean, even if 80% of the people who come through today are just curious, there's 20% of people who walk through here, and all I need is one of them to say, all right, I'll take it.
Sure. Those people are also going to be looking online to find the house. And the reason we don't hold open houses, in addition to the looky-loo factor, I'll call it, is it is a big liability as well. You may have seen the headlines, houses get robbed, agents get beat up. Our agents are employees, and so we're just not willing to take that risk, and we just don't think it's a great use of our clients' time.
So this is a different, and I would imagine that one of the challenges for you guys, for as successful as you've been, is getting people to think about something that has been thought about one way for a very long time, and now you're asking them to kind of change perspective on that. How do you go about doing that?
It's tough, and if you figure it out, let me know. There is an educational component. There is a kind of a resetting of expectations, because you mentioned it. Your agent sounded like she's your friend in some respect. And I think this is a strange industry from the standpoint of people are willing to spend a lot of money just to maintain a quote-unquote friendship. And I talk to people a lot about this. They say, ooh, I'd love to use Door because I'm going to save $7,000, $10,000, but I've got a brother-in-law who's an agent or something, and I feel obligated to use that person. And I always tell them, great, if your friend is going to match what we'll charge you,
then use
your friend, because they're your friend. That's a valuable relationship. But if they're charging you a lot more than what we're charging you, that's a business transaction, and they want your money. And so I think it's really important to keep in mind the average American who has a mortgage has something like 26% equity in their home, and they tend to pay a quarter of that to a realtor. So a quarter of the equity that you've earned goes to real estate agent fees. You can't make money on your home when you have such a big fee off the top of the transaction.
It's interesting because it almost has become a loss that we expect. It's just kind of this cost of doing business, and this is what it is, and that's that.
That's 100% correct.
Okay, so now tell me about the door difference.
Which part of it?
Well, I mean, so really kind of walk me through the process here. So, okay, I want to buy a house.
Yep.
Do you list homes?
We do. So
Okay.
we're about 60% towards listings. And
do I find those homes on the MLS? So things that I've been looking at on the MLS very well may be door properties?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So starting on the listing side, what we've done is we've really specialized the model. So our listing agents just work on listings. Our buyers agents just work with buyers. And then we have a lead management team. We call them our client managers. And all they do is talk with inbound clients who are interested in what we're doing. If you list a home with us, we stage it with existing furniture. We do a 3D model. We take professional photographs. We put the yard sign in the yard, the lockbox. We put it on the MLS. So we do everything you'd expect. And then you work with your agent through to close.
My door agent.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so let me back you up here. So one of the things you mentioned is staging. So you will stage my home, and
We do.
all I do is pay you $5,000?
At close, that's right.
Just for empty house, or hey, you don't like my furniture?
We don't. We don't bring in furniture. So this is with existing furniture.
Okay.
If you have
so
a vacant,
you use my stuff in my
Correct.
home and maybe rearrange it.
Yeah, really, it's really important to keep in mind what we really call it photography staging, because we're trying to make the house look great for the camera lens. Camera lenses, as you know, view the world slightly differently than humans do. And so at a very high level, it's things like, for instance, taking up rugs, because you take up the rug and it makes the room visually appear larger. It's things like orienting the furniture such that when the photographer comes in, it makes the room look open and inviting. It's things like that, because it's not trickery. It's just making it so that when you see the photos, you see them in the best light, because you have very few seconds to appeal to someone when they're browsing for homes. When you look on Zillow or Trulia or whatnot, you thumb through a few images. If you don't like what you see, particularly you've probably seen the iPhone photograph listings, when it's dark and dingy and you see a dirty bathtub and stuff like that.
Yeah.
No one wants to see that. That hurts the market value of your home.
Well, I know for me, when I look at that, I think to myself, if you don't care enough to take a proper photo, I can't imagine what kind of nightmare you're going to be once we have to start negotiating and buy this house.
Well, Lord knows what you're going to find in the crawl space.
Well, 100%, right? If you can't even take a picture, when's the last time you changed the air filters or did any sort of maintenance or whatever else on your home?
Right.
So you've talked about a lot of different segments of employees in your company. So am I assigned to one person?
That's right.
Okay, so I want to buy a house. I call a door. I say, hey, I'm looking to buy, and I've got one person who's going to follow me through the whole transaction?
Generally speaking, yes. If you're looking to buy a home, we talked about listings. Again, what usually happens is you tend to find the house online, the house or houses online. Someone calls in or they request a showing through door.com. And then we have an agent go out to meet you at the home. One of the benefits, I think, of our model is that we also have a very team-based model, particularly on the buy side. So let's say you go out with Van, who's one of our agents, like the home that you see, and then the next day you want to go out on another showing for some other home or homes, and she's with another client, we bring in another one of our buyer's agents to show you that home. So it provides a lot more availability for our clients.
Interesting.
Right, and so you're not depending on one person's schedule to be able to access a home.
Yeah, because, and I know that for some of our folks who may not have gone through the home buying process before, when you sign with an agent, as you do, that's an exclusive relationship.
Correct.
And I've got to contact that agent to do everything. And if this agent is very busy or popular, it may be a couple of days before I can go.
And I think something, you mentioned the agreement you signed, particularly as a buyer, something to keep in mind is in the compensation section of that buyer representation agreement. It says you, Mr. Buyer, are obligated to pay me 3% generally if the seller doesn't pay my fee. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that the buyer representation agreement you're signing is obligating you to pay a fee to your buyer's agent regardless of what happens. So people don't really realize that. You hope that the seller is going to be offering commission, but if they're not, you're on the hook for that money.
But generally, how often does that happen? I mean, kind of put that into perspective for me. I mean, we've bought many homes over the years. I've never run into a situation where the seller says, well, we're just not offering any sort of commission here.
For sale by owner, you run into that. So if you are looking at a for sale by owner house, and we've seen this, and the seller says, heck no, I'm not offering any commission, the buyer's agent can demand that you pay them that compensation. Now,
to be fair, I mean, you noted earlier that the number of FSBO listings is actually quite down. So
yeah, it's about 8%.
The chances of me running into that are kind of slim.
Fairly small. Now, when you couple that with the 5% of listings that offer under 3% compensation, you know, you're in double-digit percentages.
So, what kind of buyer's agreement, I guess, do I enter into with Door?
Yeah. So with Door, it's a slightly different agreement. We use the same Texas Association of Realtor agreement that most agents would use. It just says whatever commission we receive, 50% of that is going to go back to you.
So as a buyer, so we want to make sure that folks understand here, so you as a buyer, or really the agent as a buyer's agent, is generally, in most cases, entitled to a 3% commission of the price of the sale of the home.
That's right.
In a traditional setup, that agent says, thank you very much, this is my 3%, it's been lovely doing business with you, I bought you the soap dish for your bathroom,
right.
Congratulations on your new home, please keep me in mind for future business. What you guys, and let's say it's a $20,000 commission. So what you folks do is, thank you very much for my $20,000. I'm actually going to take 10. I'm going to refund the customer back the other 10.
$10,000.
Just because we think that's the right thing to do.
That's right. Yeah, I say it often.
Because you remember your mother who had to shell out $50,000.
Well, and in no way, shape, or form cost $20,000 to do that transaction.
Right.
And so you can get the house, and you have the house at the end of the day working with an old-fashioned brokerage, or you come work with Door and you get the house plus $10,000.
So really, and really that's the main message point here is, for you folks, the net result is the same. You have this house. Now you can have the house and a bucket of cash, or the house. Right,
and I would add also a bucket of cash. I like that expression.
It's trademarked.
Yeah, also a great experience, because at the end of the day, we want to make this easier and less expensive. And so we track a metric called Net Promoter Score, which is, you've probably seen the emails, it's how likely would you be to recommend this business on a scale of 1 to 10? Simple question. RE/MAX, for instance, the big national franchisor, they have a 6. And the scale is -100 to +100. Last year, ours was 74. So our clients are thrilled with the experience, plus you get money back.
Who's better than you?
I don't know.
Surely someone's an 80. Are they?
Not that I've ever seen. Okay. I mean, that is quite literally an industry-leading client satisfaction score. I've never seen a higher one.
Again, you're asking people to get rid of an old idea of thinking. What do you think the biggest challenge for you guys is in doing that?
I think it's awareness that this problem exists. You know, one of the things that really irks me is compensation. What agents are getting paid in this space is really hidden. And case in point is, we've been talking a lot about 3% commission. So you're buying a home, your agent's getting 3% of the purchase price. MLSs have a rule that prohibits people from publishing how much buyer's agents are getting paid. So that means if you're buying a $500,000 home, your buyer's agent's getting paid $15,000 out of that transaction. For most people in their life, they never pay anyone $15,000 for a single service. But Zillow, Trulia, Ebby.com, AllieBethAllman.com, Door.com, all those websites are prohibited from publishing on a given listing, your buyer's agent will be paid X thousand dollars for this transaction. And so I think what that does is it propagates this myth that, oh, my services are free as a buyer's agent, which is just not true. It makes it harder for consumers to make a decision, because they don't really feel the full brunt of that fee. And so a family is buying a $500,000 home, and we all know homes have gotten really expensive in DFW. They don't have a choice. They don't really see in black and white, how much is this service going to cost me? How many home equity dollars am I shelling out to get this home?
For folks that are listening and saying, well, wait a second, this guy is saying, hey, it's a big secret, but yet I can automatically calculate it. You don't necessarily mean that, hey, the amount here is not easily discerned. It's the idea of these aren't line items, right? So when you purchase this home or sell a home, hey, this much is going to be taken off and given to the agents or split between them.
You tend to not see those fees itemized until you're at the title company with the closing disclosure.
Right, and you think, oh wow,
yeah, that's a lot of money, and then it's too late. You're under contract.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like when you're buying an airline ticket, right? Before they had to do all this disclosure, it was like, okay, well, it's however much money the ticket is, and you. Oh, wait a second, $35 of that is, whatever fee and another 100 for or whatever else. So folks may say, okay, well, wait a second though, we're talking about the idea of, well, my services are free if you're a buyer because you're not paying. You kind of are, because as a seller, I would imagine you're saying, okay, we need to walk away with $100,000 out of this sale. We know we're going to have to take 6% off the top, so we need to sell it for 106 more than we got. So I mean, it's you do pay. I mean, you may be paying in the purchase price. You're not cutting the check. But I would imagine that because people are so well trained to know, as you mentioned, that there's a big chunk of this that's going to never make it to your pocket. That we've got to pad the transaction somehow. Right.
So think about a smaller transaction. Let's say you're buying a new grill at Home Depot. And there's an advertisement that says this $300 grill, if you buy it tomorrow, we're going to throw in grill implements and a free can of propane. I think you intuitively understand that propane and the grill implements are not really free. You're buying them. You're paying for them, and then they're coming out of the cost of the transaction. So similarly, you make a great point. If you have a friend selling a $500,000 home, $30,000 is going to commissions. And so if you went directly to your friend and say, hey, I want to buy this home, your friend would be receiving the exact same amount of money net if they sold it to you for $470,000. So that $30,000 is only going to commissions, to real estate agents. So if you bought that from your friend for $470,000, everyone is better off because you're getting the house for less money. Your friend has the same amount of net proceeds. Your tax basis is going to be lower. I think people don't think about that if you reduce the purchase price, your tax basis is lower.
Yeah. So you mentioned this kind of team approach to customer service. Does that happen throughout the transaction?
It does. I think one thing to keep in mind, the independent contractor agent is generally a one-man band or one-woman band. And so if they go out of town, they hopefully find a fellow agent at the brokerage to help them out. But at Door, our agents are employees, so we do want them to be able to have a life and take vacation. And so again, going back to that idea of, okay, I want to go see a listing tomorrow. If your agent that you met originally is out of town, there's another agent who's going to help you. If they're out on a showing, there's another agent that's going to be able to help you. And so as you move down the transaction also, we have Door Title, so we have a title insurance company. We have Door Mortgage, so you can get a mortgage with Door as well. And we're all employees of Door, so there's really not the competitive aspect that you'd get at other brokerages where really all those agents are competing with themselves, or competing with each other rather. So there's really not a strong incentive to cooperate within the brokerage because each agent in essence has his or her own business within the brokerage.
My concern would be, I know sometimes, for example, we bought a rent house maybe a couple of years ago. It got real messy. There was a lot of things that the buyer's agent had promised us that then they had forgotten about or conveniently forgotten about once the price became different, and suddenly these things you were going to do, now that we're not paying as much, and we really had to go through the process with a fine-tooth comb. And luckily, our agent, because she was part of the entire process, there was no, oh, well, now I've got to catch this person. We had all the information, all the notes, all of the, for folks that are listening, they're going to say, well, this Door approach sounds nice, but I would much rather one person committed to this project so they know all the details and all the information and never have to say, oh, I need to get up to speed on that. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I'd answer that two ways. First is, it's black and white. It's what's in the contract. And of course we run into difficult transactions. And if if the agent on the other side of the deal is saying, well, now that the price is changing, we're not going to do X, Y, Z, what did the amendment say? What did the repair amendment say? Because if that said you're fixing X, Y, Z item, they got to fix that item or the seller's in default. And I think something to keep in mind if you're buying a home is if you have a repair amendment, you need to be really specific. So what I mean by that is, let's say a wall needs to be repainted in the bedroom, and it's a 3-bedroom house. An amendment that says seller agrees to repaint bedroom wall is insufficient. It needs to say seller agrees to repaint north wall in master bedroom with bare color XYZ with a professional who paints walls in the normal course of business. Something like that, so that you know black and white exactly what is supposed to happen, and there are records showing the chain of that transaction. I think secondly, I would say, if you're working with that one-man band real estate agent, it opens up a whole can of worms from the standpoint of, what if that person is on a showing at 4 o'clock and your option period ends at 5 o'clock? You know, that's when that starts to break down, is when you have one person who is the jack of all trades but master of none, because some agents are great at finding clients, but they're not great at negotiations. Some are great at negotiations and not great at finding clients. And so when you're relying on one person to do everything, that generally means they're not great at one specific thing. And so by specializing, like we do at Door, we think that ultimately results in a better transaction, a better experience. And I think that is borne out in our industry-leading client satisfaction score, also borne out in when you look at the submarkets in which we operate, we negotiate better than the market at large and give you money back on top of that. So if you're worried about getting the best deal, well, we'll negotiate better for you because of our great process, and then we'll give you money back on top of that.
I mean, I do think it's a little unfair to suggest that, you know, I mean, look, if you're working with an agent and your option period is over at 5 and they're tied, I mean, and they're not in touch with you, and they're tied up at an open house at 4 o'clock, you know, and on. I would hope that that's the exception as opposed to the rule with a general traditional real estate agent. But I do understand your point in terms of saying, hey, look, there's a bunch of resources. I think conversely, most of these folks, while they may be independent, work for large brokerages. You know, hey, if I'm an EBI, you know, agent, I do have the support of and power of the entire brokerage and whatever else.
I think that's a line you hear pretty often from the big brokerages, and it really doesn't.
Is it not true?
No, it's not true.
Okay.
It's not true because it's a loose confederation of a lot of independent contractors that work at those brokerages. You know, that is a great line, but, and I think going back to our conversation about hip pockets, you hear that a lot. So you hear, oh, well, we've got 1,000 agents, so imagine all the hip pocket listings that we get. I think when you look at the math of the situation, though, there are 120,000 transactions a year. And even if you have 1,000 agents, the chance that any one of them have the house in the area that you're looking for is astronomically low, because they on average do 4 or 5 deals a year in a geography of, you know, maybe it's all DFW, maybe it's North Dallas.
That seems like a low number. Maybe
That's the average.
Maybe I just work with really good agents. I mean, this woman that I mean, she is rocking and rolling. I mean, it's like every 2 weeks she's closing somebody.
I'd have to look in the MLS to figure it out, and I'm happy to do that. But think about it this way. I mean, even an agent who is just killing it is doing...
Let's say 1 a month.
1 a month. Our agents do 6 a month is what we're averaging. And so I think, I liken it to spine surgery. Let's say, God forbid, you have to get a spine surgery. Do you want to have the surgeon who did 4 or 5 surgeries last year, or even 1 a month last year, or the surgeon who's doing 4 to 6 a month?
Well, he might be well rested. I don't know. The idea. So we're through the buying process with Door. Hey, I found a house. A Door agent comes and meets me. We look around. I'm assuming they're doing all the things that a regular agent. They're running comps. Hey,
That's right.
Is this price appropriate for this? We just ran into a property not 2 weeks ago. That was, I mean, we said to the agent, what is the comp? I mean, this thing is still on the market for at least $250,000 more than the closest comp could even get near. We said, you know, and they said, well, we're just hoping somebody buys it.
I think that is a really interesting topic. The idea that, oh, I want to list my home high and just hope that the buyer comes by and gives me a good offer. That's actually a surefire way to make less money selling your home. The reason is as follows. When you look at the data, about 50%, half of the people who are ever going to see your home see it in the first 7 days on market. And so you have a $500,000 home and you list it for $600,000. Everyone who looks at that home is going to realize it's overpriced. That's not a secret. And they're going to say, well, you know, this bozo has it listed way too high, and there are 5 other homes that are comparable that are priced reasonably. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to go look at those 5 reasonably priced homes. So even though it feels like that's the way to make the most money, list it high and kind of bring it down, you're cutting off a huge chunk of the market.
Yeah, I think it stigmatizes a property.
It really does, because, and you kind of alluded to this, you look at a home that's been on the market 100 days, and the first thing you think is, what's wrong with that house?
Right. Yeah, what's wrong with it, and what is the value compared to the whatever the rest of the street or whatever the rest of the neighborhood is doing?
Exactly.
So again, to point out that the part of the door services are some of those traditional things. Hey, I'm going to run the comps, let you know, is this a good price for this house? You know, what might you actually, you know, go in on? They're doing contracts, they're doing all of this stuff. I mean, it's a full service real estate transaction.
That's right.
You also mentioned title company and mortgage. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we got our title license in September last year. We got our mortgage license a few months ago. We actually had our first mortgages close a couple weeks ago now. The idea there is no one really wants a mortgage. No one really wants a title policy. You want to buy a house or you want to sell a house. And usually what happens in a traditional transaction is the agent tends to tell you, here's my mortgage guy, here's my title lady, go talk to them and they'll help you out. And we looked at that, and we think that it is a better experience to be able to do the transaction under one roof so that you work with one company that knows everything about the transaction, that is able to save you a lot of money along the way. Because we're not paying, as a traditional mortgage company does, for instance, a big cost of acquisition, so a big commission to that mortgage loan officer. So our mortgages are less expensive. We can give fantastic rates because we don't have those big costs baked into them like a traditional mortgage company would. When you get to title, that's regulated by the state, so you cannot compete on price in Texas. It's illegal. And so we can't give a better price, but no one can, but we can make it easier and give great service.
Quantify it for me. You mentioned our mortgages are less expensive, our rates are better. I mean, where do you fall compared to my credit union or my bank or whatever?
Really difficult to answer. We'd have to look at the specifics of your situation, and I'm not a licensed loan officer, so there's some things I can't say. But the best answer I can give, I think, is because we don't have mortgage loan officers tend to get a percent to 1.5% of the loan amount. So we don't have loan officers who get paid like that. They're employees, much like our agents are. So we have a lower cost structure, and thus we're able to give a better rate.
I'm feeling like and I'm joking here, but between the cut commissions and the no incentives for mortgage people, how do your employees afford to go on all these vacations that they get to go
I think that's a really interesting question. The average real estate agent makes about $42,000 a year.
Is that it?
That's it.
Wow.
And so we pay our agents more than that to start, and then they earn up towards 6 figures over the first couple of years. So our agents are, I think our agents have a much better job than the traditional independent contractor agent. You see a huge amount of independent contractor agents who do real estate part-time, and I think that's a dangerous thing.
Sure. I think that, honestly, that's the thing that attracts a lot of people to become agents. They think, okay, I've got kids in school, I want to be home in the afternoons, whatever else it is. To your point earlier, that makes now this one person even more constricted in terms of the amount of time they can give me.
I mean, again, do you want a part-time spine surgeon? No, of course not. And so this is the biggest transaction of most people's life.
Sure.
And why is it okay to use your kid's soccer coach who's a real estate agent on the side? I mean, that is not a financially sound decision to make. You want to use someone who does it all the time as a full-time professional.
Hopefully the soccer coach part is the part-time job, but I see your point. So for folks that are going through the process with you, it's kind of a full suite of services, which apparently is quite popular. I mean, you guys are expanding and growing. I should mention you're from North Texas, and you're watching this business really expand beyond this region.
Right. So I grew up here in Dallas, and we started here in Dallas. We're now operating in DFW, Austin, Houston, and San Antonio. And 2016 was our first year doing transactions. We did our first sale in February of 2016. And we did just under 100 transactions that year. We did over 300 last year, and we'll do 700 to 1,000 this year.
Wow. I mean, that's an incredible rate of growth.
It's been a wild ride, to be sure.
Why do you think it's so popular? Do you think it's the money? Do you think it's the service? Do you think it's a combination?
I think a lot of people tend to come for the money because they say, this has changed. They intuitively understand they're finding the house, or if they're selling a home, buyers are finding the house, and yet the fee structure hasn't changed. And so you're paying all this money in a totally different paradigm. But I think that our clients who transact with us afterwards would say, it was the best experience I had. And that's what we're going for. And flat fee brokerages have existed for years, of course. You can pay $500 and get your home in the MLS and get no service for it. But that's not what we're trying to do. The big win for us is I saved $12,000, but it was also the best experience I've ever had buying or selling a home. That's the big win.
Sure, yeah. And I would imagine the word of mouth doesn't hurt either. When somebody has a great experience, they're going to let other people know about it.
That's the best marketing any business can do, is word of mouth.
There's got to be an element of too good to be true here for folks. I would imagine that people are probably a little bit hesitant, and we've done stories about many other companies before that offer incredible savings and incredible service. And it's kind of like beating my head against a wall sometimes because we test them out and we research them and we even try them and sign up as customers ourselves, and people still say,
"What's the catch?
What's the catch?" There's got to be. There's no way this guy, is foregoing 6% on $1 million transaction to not only take 5, but then pay me, the other 1.5 from the other side.
Well, I'd answer that a few different ways. One, it costs no more money to sell $1 million house than it does a $200,000 house. It's exactly the same process.
So, but I don't mean to play devil's advocate here, but I think a realtor would say not so because I've got, it takes longer, there are fewer buyers, they expect an extra, a certain level of service, and they want to, $1 million buyer is going to expect a virtual tour and 3D modeling. And
we do a 3D model.
Whereas a $100,000 person might not, and those may go faster.
Yeah, so I don't think that's true, and you've probably seen the listings where there's a Park Place Bentley parked out front for the $20 million house. Like, no one buys the house because of the Bentley that's not theirs in the front yard. That's pandering, I think. You're pandering to rich people, and so no, it doesn't cost any more to sell a $1 million home. The expensive piece of the transaction is not when you're on market, because that's just time. So no, I firmly believe it doesn't cost anything extra to sell a $1 million home, and indeed our average sale price was the second highest in DFW last year at the beginning of the year, just behind Briggs Freeman Sotheby's, the brokerage that does a lot of Park Cities listings.
That's where my agent works.
There you go. Yeah, so our average sale price is a little over $500,000 right now. The average sale price in DFW is around $340,000.
So 500 is
our record is we've sold a $4 million house, and we charge the guy $5,000 to do so because it doesn't cost any more. So it's too good to be true. We hear that a lot, and agents will say about Door all the time, "You get what you pay for," and that's a refrain that we hear a lot. I would say a couple things, and you even mentioned this, and I don't hold it against you. I don't mean that, but you said kind of cut commissions or discount commissions, and I always say, what are we discounting? There's no legally required fee. There's no mandated fee. It's just this customary fee that no one knows. I've researched this. No one knows where the 6% came from, and I would add, the U.S. and Canada are the only two Western first world countries where it's that high. In Western Europe, it's 2% or less total commission for the entire transaction, 2%.
In certain states here in the U.S., my family, like I mentioned before we got on the air, is from New York, and they're shocked by how high the commissions are in Texas, because they're just not that way in New York and New York City specifically.
Nationwide average is about 5.2% commission, I believe. But yeah, it's insanely high here, and it doesn't make any sense. And so I would say we're not discounting anything because there is no fee written in the stone that we discount. What we're doing is we're charging a reasonable fee for a professional service.
Yeah, I mean, and providing the value that you say should be there all along.
Yeah, I think so.
So shifting gears real quick before I let you go, I do want to talk briefly about kind of first-time home buyer. We're seeing a lot of people. I do think the market's calming down a little bit.
It definitely is. place.
I'm seeing, I'm kind of obsessed with the MLS right now. I'm seeing a lot of price drops, a lot of, people who thought, as we mentioned, hey, let's just put it out there and see what we can get. And now things are kind of calming down, right? But we do have a lot of first-time home buyers and people who are contacting us for information. And what advice do you have for somebody who's in that situation?
I think a few things. One, 20% down payment is kind of the common wisdom. You hear that a lot. Oh, you got to put 20% down to buy a house. You actually don't. And particularly for first-time home buyers, there are a lot of great programs to put down 3%, 3.5%, 5%. Oh. Now, what I will say is you never want to get out over your ski tips on a monthly basis. I don't mean that. I don't mean stretched to the absolute limit of your debt-to-income ratio. But I am a big proponent of minimizing your cash outlay so long as your monthly payment is reasonable. And so if you're a high-earning young couple buying your first house and you have $50,000 saved, it really doesn't make sense to spend all that money on a down payment on a house, an illiquid asset. So you can minimize your down payment, be smart about it, and have a lot more cash for an emergency fund, for instance, which I think makes a lot more sense.
What does that do to, I think that we see a lot of homes, in terms of the appraisal for the house, if I'm only putting down 3% in cash, and again, we'll use a $100,000 property for easy math here. Well, now that house has got to appraise for $97,000 in order for the bank to approve the loan. If I put down 20%, the house has got to appraise for $80,000. There's a big difference there in terms of what they're willing to do. 3% sounds like a super low number.
I would look at it slightly differently. In actuality, if you have a $100,000 home and you put down, you're going to put down $20,000, 20%, and it appraises for only $80,000. You're going to renegotiate the price because you're under contract for too high a price. Now, there's some differences on the margin. Perhaps there's a multiple offer situation and the buyer waived the financing contingency or waived the appraisal right or something like that. But generally speaking, if the appraisal comes in significantly below the purchase price, there's going to be a renegotiation on the price for that reason. So I don't worry about that. What you do see is some sellers, some listing agents look askance at lower down payments because they think, oh, that buyer is not really able to close on this house. Right. Yeah. I don't view it that way so long as the buyer does have the cash and the loan officer has looked at their financials and actually pre-qualified them, because from the seller's perspective, as long as they get the money, that's the big question. Are they going to get the money?
The bank is cutting the check at the end of the day. So
exactly. So who cares what the down payment is, so long as the buyer can actually qualify to get the house.
Didn't we kind of run into that problem, though, when we had the big kind of real estate crisis and people were putting down
0%, no doc loans,
5%, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out of the market, everybody's upside down, people are being foreclosed on.
Yep.
But yet your advice is put down 3%.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple things different, and I want to come back to the question of housing affordability, because I think that's a big issue right now. But a couple really big differences. One was, you've probably heard of the ninja loans from the financial crisis. No doc, no jobs, ninja. And the average credit score of borrowers since the crisis has gone up significantly. The last I read, it was over 700 on average. So it is much harder to qualify for a mortgage now than it was pre-financial crisis, which I think is a good thing. I mean, if you argue otherwise, I think you're insane. The run-up in prices we've seen recently has been really supply-driven as opposed to demand-driven, which it was back then. For the financial crisis, you saw these crazy loan programs, no income verification, not a good idea. What you see right now is a real supply constraint. So there are a lot of first-time buyers now. The millennials, the biggest generation in American history, actually. And so the first-time home buying age tends to be 31, so an older millennial. And the biggest cohort of millennials is right now around 28, 29, 30. So there is still a lot of demand coming down the pipe. And you look at supply, and it's very low in North Texas. And so what we see right now, I think, is everyone knows there's been a big run-up in prices in the last 5 years. And so housing affordability is a real issue now. Generally, what has happened in history is home builders can make up a lot of that supply gap. They come build first-time home buyer targeted homes, but lots are too expensive now. And it was November last year where the first time ever new homes ticked above $400,000 as an average sales price. That's an expensive home.
Yeah. Especially for your first time out.
Especially for your first time out. And so there is a real affordability crisis right now where it is harder for first-timers to buy homes than it has been previously. So I think what's driving that in large part is just a change in the way Americans live. And what I mean by that is urban landmass in the country is a little under 3% of the total area, and urban populations have increased 10% in the last decade. So you have more and more people plugging into a fixed amount of space. Supply and demand, right? Mm-hmm. Supply is really low. Demand, while it's not kind of driven by the strange loan programs that it was back in the pre-financial crisis era, demand is there, and so you see a big price run up.
So kind of knowing what you can afford is always a very conventional wisdom here. We'll agree to disagree on how much money you should be putting down, on a house. But really, to put a finer point on the service that you're providing here, you're allowing people to use more of their money.
Correct.
I know for us, when we saved up for our first house, it was a big accomplishment. We saved this money, or it was saved for us, I should say. And we gave it all away.
Yep.
And we said, here you go.
Yep.
Here's all of it, literally all of it. Your model looks at this a little differently. Lower fees, flat fees, consistent fees. Mm-hmm. There's no question at closing what it's going to look like.
Right.
Which apparently is resonating with buyers.
I think so. And going back to the idea, again, just to be really clear, I'm not advocating for a low down payment just so you can saddle yourself with a ton of debt. What I think is a smart move for first buyers is, I'm just making up numbers here, but let's say you had $50,000 saved between the two of you, and you could put down 3% or put down all $50,000. Let's say that was 20%. If you put down 3%, you then have a big chunk of cash for an emergency savings to put into an S&P index fund, something like that. And historically, the returns in the S&P are going to outpace house price growth.
Sure.
So for a young couple buying a home, if you minimize your down payment, maintain your cash, and keep your monthly payment reasonable, you can invest for your kids, invest for a college savings, invest for retirement, do some great things with that cash rather than put it into, again, what is really an illiquid asset that is expensive to sell, which, again, we're trying to fix.
Last question I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let you go. 15, 20, or 30 first-time home buyers? How long do you think their
mortgage term?
Yeah.
I did a 30-year when I bought my house 3 years ago, before door, I might add. And I think you got to look at the interest rate. From the perspective of, my interest rate was about 3.6%, which is historically incredibly low.
Yeah.
I mean, you might argue even free, because when you add in inflation of, call it 2 or 3%, that's a crazy low rate. And so even now when you have 4.4%, 4.5%, interest rates ticking up, historically that's an incredibly low interest rate. And so in my view, and some people may disagree, I think if you have a historically low interest rate, that when you back out inflation is arguably 1%, 2%, maybe 0%, why not let the bank take the monetary risk for that as long as possible? Now, there is a lot of common wisdom to taking as short a loan as possible and paying it off as quickly as possible. I think when you look at historical housing returns, you tend to make more money with an S&P index fund. I'm a personal finance nerd, as you might be able to tell, but it really comes down to a person's individual circumstances. If you have the discipline to save on an ongoing basis and put that money into an index fund, that's probably a better way to go, so long as your monthly payment is comfortable for you or for you and your significant other. I think another way to look at it is, I've got a back house, for instance, that I rent out. That offsets a lot of your holding costs. That makes the house relatively a lot less expensive. I've always had a roommate in my house, a good friend of mine who rents one of the bedrooms. That also offsets some of my holding costs. So I think if you are particularly a young single person buying a house, if you have the flexibility to buy, say, a 2-2 instead of a 1-1, you can rent out that second bedroom and offset a lot of your holding costs.
The bigger house may end up costing you less money because of the income that you can generate.
So I think if you have flexibility, and if the interest rate is great, historically great, let the bank hold that money as long as possible. and look at some creative ways to offset your holding costs.
Perfect. Alex, where can people find Door, either online or on social media?
Yeah, visit door.com.
Easy enough.
Easy enough.
Easy enough. We appreciate you being here. I'm assuming you guys are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff as well?
Yep, we are.
At Door?
Facebook, I think we're Door Homes, and Twitter, I think, is the same.
All right. I appreciate you taking so much time to talk with us today. We certainly appreciate it. Remember, leave a review of our podcast on iTunes and the Google Play Store. You'll find all sorts of other interesting episodes, including our experts from FinCon. You'll find them all right now. iTunes, Google Play Store, and of course at Fox 4 News/Basic Training.